So last Friday, which was the 8th of July, I went along to the lovely King's Hall, Ilkley venue to see a show called Something About George. So this is put on by the Something About Productions company. They'd previously done a show featuring the story of Paul Simon, and this was a story about the solo years of George Harrison. So starting with immediately post-Beatles, when he recorded his very famous and wonderful album All Things Must Pass, taking us right through the story of subsequent musical initiatives, how he got into film production, the traumas of his later life, getting sick with cancer, having an imposter coming into his house and attacking him and his wife. And after the show, I had the good fortune to talk to the main singer and narrator for the show, Daniel Taylor, and also John Fellows, who's one of the writers and producers of the show. And I started by asking John what the origins of this particular show were.
The three of us in the show, this guy Gary Edward Jones, who's a fellow producer, and he also stars in our other show. We've got Bill Elms, who does our communications and PR, and myself, who I do the writing, some of the musical direction, and again co-produce as well. And essentially, we first came up with a show called Something About Simon, the Paul Simon story, which we were really, really pleased with. It did really, really well. We went to New York, we went to the Edinburgh Fringe, and it was just looking like that was going to kind of crystallise for us and become quite successful. We had lots of big plans going back to America, all sorts of stuff, and then COVID happened. It completely cut us off at the knees, as it did with so many sort of different theatre productions. And so we'd always talked about starting a second show, and we talked about different people that we wanted to do another show about. We used lockdown as our opportunity to write the new show.
I see.
This was the first show was a co-write. It was two people that worked on that, myself and another talented writer. And this show I wrote solo, and then we had some input from the other producers. And that was our origin, basically. We always wanted as a company to pick kind of really authentic figures to write shows about, people that might not have had shows done about them before. Okay. So George Harrison seemed like a natural follower.
Okay, I was going to say, why did you settle on George? You partly answered it there.
Well, yeah, so lots of stuff has been done about Paul, about John, about the Beatles themselves. Not so much has been done about George Harrison, and with our company we're looking to sort of do shows about people who you might not have first thought would have this type of show done about them. And as I say, George Harrison just seemed like a really natural follow-on to our Paul Simon show.
So Something Productions had a problem just prior to their Ilkley show, and that was that their regular pianist had been taken ill. John explains how they managed to cover for him.
So we have a regular pianist, a guy called Jordan, who usually plays throughout the rest of the tour.
Right.
And then unfortunately he got taken ill yesterday. And so we literally had 24 hours notice to essentially either rearrange the show or find another piano player to step in. Okay. Fortunately we found George, who did an absolutely excellent job tonight. He managed to learn it all in the space of one evening. And came and played the show tonight.
And you got his photo on your profile.
And we got his photo on it. Wow, I didn't know that. Did we actually? Gosh, that's Bill. That's our PR guy who does that sort of stuff. He's managed. Wow, he even got the photo on the thing. I'm impressed.
So because his photo was on here, I'd assume that he'd been taken ill, and then you'd kind of slapped him a few times around the face.
Just dragged him back up on stage. No, not quite. No, we managed to, as I say, we were very, very lucky to draft him in at 24 hours notice. Never even seen the show before. He hadn't done anything about it before. And we spent a day rehearsing, and it was a really fun show. It was great.
Because there's some tricky time signatures. I think there's Here Comes the Sun's tricky, isn't it? And I think Here Comes the Moon, I sense that there's some tricky time signatures in there.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that. And I'd Have You Anytime as well has some really interesting kind of time signature things going on. It's a bit of a signature George move in terms of musicality, to put in lots of bars of like 3 or a bar of 2. Or it's really, really interesting musically.
And I asked John and Daniel about the choice of Harrison's songs for the show. Here's John.
So it's obviously George Harrison has a lot of songs that are incredibly well known, the Beatles numbers and things like that, and All Things Must Pass as well is a very, very well known album. But the whole sort of premise was that we wanted the show to be something for everybody. So if you're a die-hard fan and you really love the album tracks that you won't have heard on the radio, we wanted to have something in there for you where you sort of turn up and you go, oh wow, they're doing they're doing this one. I thought no one but me loved this song.
Okay,
you know?
that's a good one.
And we also wanted to do, obviously, we wanted to do the hits, we wanted to do something, we wanted to do a lot of the Travelling Wilburys stuff, which is much wider known. And so it was simply a matter of selecting songs that worked chronologically in the story that we were trying to tell about his post-Beatles years, and trying to have a little bit of something for everyone. So some album tracks that for the die-hard fans, and some of the hits for people that are obviously very, will have heard them before on the radio and what have you. So it's about achieving a nice mix,
And I asked Daniel and John which was their favourite George Harrison album, excluding All Things Must Pass. Here's Daniel.
Living in the Material World.
Okay.
Probably, yeah.
Why would that be?
Just because it's the next best one after All Things Must Pass.
Okay, fair enough.
But I mean, the thing is with George, there's so much stuff. This show feels to me it's a very new show, and like all shows that are just being developed, it's very much in its embryonic stages. Okay. And I think we're still finding stuff that might. I know we've talked about, maybe try this or try that,
And here's John's choice.
Somewhere in England is a good one. I do like that's the one with All Those Years Ago on it. Yeah. I do like some of the joints from that. The Travelling Wilburys, obviously, Volume 1 and Volume 3. I like both of those.
Okay.
I quite like. It's a strange choice, this, but there's a lot of really interesting material on it, and I think the process of making the album must have been really, really interesting as well. And Brainwashed, the album that was released after his death, that his son Danny and Jeff Lynne worked on as well. I think that's got a lot of really interesting stuff in it. The original of Any Road, for example, you hear him at the start, you can hear one of the old demo recordings where he's sort of saying, "Can I get a bit more guitar in my cans," kind of thing. And I think it must have been such a fascinating process to take an album like that and say, how would George have done it? How would he have finished off this song? How would he have done it like that?
Daniel talked about the segment of the show which features the songs of the Travelling Wilburys.
We were pleasantly surprised with the Travelling Wilburys' response to those songs, and I think that's been a really because people have really really got behind it. But the songs are timeless, I mean, I'm a songwriter myself, and you kind of sit there and you go, how did he write that? It's timeless. It's like a good joke, It's like a good. I mean, I do a Tommy Cooper act, but it's like those jokes. I've broken my arm in 3 places. Stay away from them places. It's a joke. It's a joke that will stand up in 100 years. It's a song that will stand up in. They're timeless. They're not dated. It's. I think for me, Something or While My Guitar Jet, they're just all wow.
Yeah, the Wilbury section felt like a real highlight tonight, actually. They're good rocking tunes.
And you can always sense it as well from the audience. You can see them. Oh, do you remember this one? Do you remember where we were? It's always they're very memorable. The Wilburys.
They're a band highlight as well. We love playing those songs.
Yeah. Okay, well maybe that helped. Maybe that comes over. And John told me about the show as it's adapted for the Edinburgh Fringe, which in fact will be the next performance of the Something About George show.
It'll be stripped back there, won't it?
Oh, will it? It's a stripped back festival show, yeah. Okay. So for that one, we've got it's mainly acoustic guitar, a little bit of electric guitar, and keyboards.
And a bit of Simon and a bit of Harrison, or
so both shows will be there. So the one after the other, they're on in I think is it called the Bijou Tent off the top of my head.
The Bijou Tent is the Spiegel, isn't it? Spiegel Bijou Tent.
In Edinburgh Fringe, as I say, from the first 2 weeks, one after the other. We've got I think it's Simon first and then George, or maybe the other way around. I can't remember. But both 1 hour versions of the festival version of the show.
And I asked Daniel and John if they'd had any contact with the George Harrison estate about the production. Here's John.
There was talks about approaching them to see if they maybe come down and watch something, or if they, but at the same time, as we say, the show's kind of in its embryonic stage right now, and if we were going to try and invite royalty down to watch it, so to speak, then
you've also got the stuff that it's very close, it's very raw, even when you're just talking about death. I mean, I remember with John Lennon, we were going to have Cynthia, the one who was going to come down, was it? Cynthia was going to come down and watch the show, but it was something that was too close to the people from the Lennon estate, but
Yoko came to see that?
She didn't. She was involved with the casting and the scripting. So anything that we changed, that we put in songs, take songs out, and we'd literally have to go straight to her in her New York office and say, "We're just putting putting this in. Are you cool with that?" And but I think the problem is that the gunshots, because our show opened with the gunshots, So. And you go into a day in a life, and it's all as him, so it's a little bit different, So,
And that was Daniel Taylor and John Fellows from the Something About George show, which I went to see at King's Hall, Ilkley, last week, talking to me after the show. And thanks very much to Daniel Taylor and to John Fellows for talking to me.